Marcos paced back and forth in his spacious living room, eyes fixed on the floor as frantic thoughts raced through his mind. He was a young, successful man, with more money than he had ever imagined. His relationship with Camilla was strong, full of love and companionship, but a doubt gnawed at him. He knew that money could distort things, and he wanted to make sure her family accepted him for who he really was, not for his bank account. He stopped in front of the window, gazing at the city glowing before his eyes. "I need to be sure," he whispered to himself. The thought had been tormenting him for weeks. What if Camilla's parents only accepted him because of his fortune? What if they never considered him worthy of their daughter without it? This uncertainty deeply unsettled him. That's when the idea hit him, bold and somewhat risky. Marcos decided he would disguise himself as an ordinary man, someone simple, without the weight of money influencing people's perceptions. He would show up to meet Camilla's parents without the trappings of his wealth. No expensive clothes, no flashy luxury watch, no imported car. Just him, Marcos, a regular guy. Camilla didn't know about his plan. She had described him to her parents as an honest, hard-working man, and that's what he would be in their eyes. The idea made him anxious, a mix of fear and excitement. What if they rejected him? What if they only saw the exterior and not the man behind the simple appearance? But he needed this. He needed to know he was accepted for who he truly was, not for his wealth. As he packed his bags, choosing simple and worn-out clothes he rarely wore, Marcos knew the biggest challenge was yet to come. He would have to maintain the pretense, live as someone he wasn't, at least for a few days. But in the end, he would discover the truth, whether it was good or bad. With a deep breath and his plan firmly set in his mind, he closed the suitcase and prepared to embark on a journey that would test not only his relationship, but also the trust he had in others. When Marcos stepped out of the taxi in front of Camilla's parents' massive mansion, the weight of his plan hit him like a stone in his stomach. The house, surrounded by an immaculate garden and solid iron gates, seemed even bigger and more opulent than he had imagined from Camilla's descriptions. The contrast between his appearance and the environment around him was stark. Dressed in worn jeans, a plain t-shirt, and a pair of shoes he barely used, Marcos felt small in the face of such grandeur. He paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and looked up. The sun was shining on the white marble entrance, and he knew at that moment that his disguise would be more challenging than he had anticipated. He was far from the comfort of his luxurious life, now immersed in the lavish lifestyle of Camilla's parents. Cautiously, he walked to the door, noting the gleam of the golden doorknob. A brief ring of the doorbell echoed through the courtyard, and after a few seconds, Clara, Camilla's mother, opened the door. Her eyes analyzed Marcos with precision. There was an awkward silence for a few seconds as she seemed to try to understand who this simple-looking man at her door was. Her gaze moved up and down, from his modest shoes to his worn-out t-shirt. "Marcos, isn't it?" she said, smiling politely but with a hint of suspicion in her voice. "Camilla has told us a lot about you." He nodded, trying to stay calm. Clara invited him inside, and the house's interior overwhelmed him with a sense of almost oppressive luxury. Expensive rugs, gleaming chandeliers, carved wood furniture, every detail oozed wealth, and Marcos mentally prepared himself for the judgment he was sure was coming. He felt like an intruder in that world, a stranger with humble clothes in the middle of all that opulence. As soon as Marcos stepped inside the mansion, he felt the piercing gaze of Clara and Roberto, Camilla's father, fixed on him like daggers. Clara, always with a polished smile, tried to hide her surprise, but the coldness in her eyes betrayed her disappointment. Roberto, more direct, barely concealed his hostility. He shook Marcos's hand without enthusiasm, his grip loose and distant. "So, you're Marcos?" Roberto said, his voice loaded with strange formality. His eyes quickly scanned Marcos's simple outfit, lingering on his worn shoes as if they were an affront to the luxurious surroundings he cherished so much. "Camilla has mentioned you." Marcos felt the discomfort grow around him like a shadow, and for a moment he thought he might be overreacting. But soon, he realized he was right. Clara invited him to sit on the expensive leather sofa, but she did so in a way that seemed more obligatory than hospitable. "What is it you do again?" Clara asked, trying to mask her curiosity behind a sweet voice, but her intentions were clear. What she really wanted to know was, "How much are you worth?" Marcos responded calmly, staying true to his disguise, mentioning his modest job. The immediate reaction from Clara and Roberto was unmistakable. Their eyes met briefly in a silent exchange of disapproval. Clara sighed quietly, while Roberto averted his gaze, as if the simple man before him was a disappointment. Camilla, sitting next to Marcos, watched in silence. Although she sensed the discomfort in the room, she chose not to intervene, perhaps hoping that over time her parents would see beyond appearances. But the tension between them seemed to grow with every passing minute. At the dinner table, the atmosphere was thick, as if the air itself was too heavy to breathe. Clara, with her impeccable posture, barely hid the look of appraisal she kept giving Marcos as she delicately moved her food around. Roberto, on the other hand, took a more aggressive stance, seizing every opportunity to pry into Marcos's personal life. "So, Marcos," Clara began, her voice soft but as sharp as a razor, "how exactly did you and Camilla meet?" She seemed to be looking for a flaw in his story, a gap to discredit any word he said. Marcos, trying to stay calm, recalled the version he and Camilla had agreed on, a casual, simple meeting without any pomp or pretense. But Roberto quickly interrupted, saying, "And this job of yours, what did you say it was again? It seems a bit unstable, doesn't it?" His tone was clearly disdainful, as if what Marcos did wasn't worth any consideration. Forced to lie to maintain his disguise, Marcos made up details about a modest job that clearly didn't meet Roberto's standards. With each new word, the tension in the room grew thicker. While Clara cast sharp looks and Roberto pressed on with his questions, Camilla grew increasingly uncomfortable. Although she knew Marcos's plan involved a test of her parents' character, she hadn't expected them to be so openly hostile. With each evasive answer Marcos gave, her discomfort deepened. Meanwhile, Marcos began to question the effectiveness of his plan. Was the disguise working? Or was it just creating a larger divide between him and Camilla's parents? He wondered if the test, meant to reveal Clara and Roberto's true nature, was going too far. When dinner ended, Roberto stood up, pulling his chair back with a faint creak. He looked at Marcos and, without a word, nodded, indicating he wanted to speak with him alone. Camilla hesitated, but Marcos, understanding what was about to happen, nodded to reassure her. They walked to Roberto's office, an elegant space decorated with mahogany furniture and shelves filled with expensive books, clearly showcasing the level of sophistication and power Roberto cultivated. As soon as the door closed, Roberto's cordial smile vanished, replaced by a cold, scrutinizing look. "So, Marcos," Roberto began, crossing his arms and leaning against the desk, "what do you really want with my daughter?" The question came out bluntly, without any pretense. "Do you really think you can give Camilla the life she deserves? Or are you here just for convenience?" Marcos felt the weight of the accusation. He knew this moment was coming, but he wasn't prepared for Roberto's openly disdainful tone. He kept his composure, took a deep breath, and responded with the same calmness he had maintained since arriving. "I love Camilla, and what I can offer her goes far beyond status or money." Roberto raised an eyebrow as if doubting every word he had just heard. Love is nice, but it doesn't pay the bills. It doesn't put food on the table. Camilla deserves a comfortable, stable life, something that, frankly, I don't see you being able to provide." The tension in the room was palpable. Every word from Roberto was a blow aimed at Marcos's confidence, but he continued to play his part, not giving in to the pressure. "I may not have much now, but my feelings for Camilla are genuine, and I'll do whatever it takes to take care of her." Roberto, keeping his eyes fixed on Marcos, remained silent for a few moments. "We'll see," he finally said, his voice full of skepticism. Out in the hallway, the air was tense after the conversation between Roberto and Marcos. Clara, who had been watching everything from a distance, didn't wait long to act. As soon as Marcos and Roberto disappeared into the office, she pulled Camilla aside with a determined look. "Camilla, we need to talk. Now." Her voice was serious without the usual motherly warmth. Camilla sighed, already guessing where the conversation was headed. They sat on the living room sofa, and Clara, without beating around the bush, got straight to the point. "You can't be serious about this boy, my daughter." Clara's voice carried a subtle tone of disapproval. "I watched him all night, and I simply don't see how he could possibly offer you what you deserve. He's not from a good family, he doesn't have money. Look at him. He didn't even bother to dress appropriately for dinner with us." Camilla, trying to stay calm, responded, "Mom, Marcos is a good man. He treats me well, and he truly loves me. It's not money that defines a person's worth." Clara shook her head, almost as if disappointed in her daughter. "You're still so naive, dear. Love? That's beautiful in fairy tales, but in real life you need more than that. Stability, security. He can't give you any of that." Camilla closed her eyes for a moment, frustrated. "You don't even know him, Mom. You're judging Marcos only by what you see, but he's so much more than that. He's smart, kind, hardworking." "Hardworking?" Clara interrupted, incredulous. "And that's enough to make you happy? I always imagined you marrying someone of status, someone who could give you a life without worries, surrounded by comfort and luxury. This Marcos, he's not on your level. Think carefully, Camilla, you deserve more. You..." Camilla felt a lump forming in her throat. It was painful to see her mother so attached to material things, unable to look beyond Marcos's appearance. She knew that arguing would be pointless at that moment. Clara had made up her mind, and nothing Camilla said seemed capable of changing her view. "Mom," Camilla murmured, "what really matters isn't what someone has, but who they are." After the intense conversation with Roberto and the silent confrontation with Clara, Marcos isolated himself in the garden, seeking a moment of peace amidst the storm raging inside him. The soft lights of the mansion illuminated the surroundings, but his mind was clouded. He wondered if he had gone too far with the plan. Sitting on a stone bench, Marcos stared at the sky, trying to find answers in the stars. The facade he had created, the poor man with a simple life, was starting to weigh on him. Roberto's disdainful looks and Clara's sharp words echoed in his head. They didn't see him as someone worthy of Camilla, and it seemed they never would. He clenched his fist, fighting the urge to reveal everything right then and there, to show them that the man they looked down on had more money than they could ever imagine, that he could give Camilla the life of luxury they wanted for their daughter. But at the same time, he knew that would defeat the whole purpose of his plan. From the start, his goal was to test whether the love and respect Camilla's parents had for him were genuine, not based on his fortune. But now he was beginning to question if this whole charade was even right. What would he really gain from this? And what if, in the end, the revelation only confirmed his worst fear? That for Clara and Roberto, money was all that mattered? Did Camilla deserve a family like that? Did he really want to connect with people who couldn't see beyond a bank balance? Doubt was eating him up. He wanted to protect Camilla, to prove that their love was stronger than any prejudice. But the weight of uncertainty grew with every passing minute. Camilla couldn't stand the silence anymore. Throughout dinner and the conversation that followed, her parents' coldness toward Marcos was obvious, and it was tearing her apart inside. Her eyes followed Marcos, now sitting alone in the garden, clearly affected by the situation. She knew she couldn't let this continue. Determined, Camilla walked into the living room, where Clara and Roberto were whispering to each other. The heavy atmosphere in the room made her pause for a second, but she took a deep breath and approached them, interrupting the conversation with a firm tone that surprised her parents. "Why are you treating Marcos like this?" she asked bluntly. "I saw the way you looked at him, heard the comments, the insinuations. It's unfair and cruel. It's unfair." Clara looked at her daughter with a stern expression but maintained her composure. "Camilla, we're just concerned about you. You deserve someone who can give you a comfortable life, someone who is on your level," Clara replied, as if it were an unquestionable truth. "No, Mom," Camilla retorted, her voice rising. "You didn't even try to really get to know him. You're judging Marcos by what you think you see, by the idea you've made of him. That's not fair." Roberto, in his usual fatherly tone, tried to step in. Camilla, understand we only want what's best for you. We're thinking about your future. He can't give you the life you deserve." "How can you say that?" Camilla interrupted, her voice trembling with frustration. "You don't even know who he really is. What you're doing isn't love, it's control." Clara crossed her arms, still unmoved. "We're protecting you. One day you'll thank us." But Camilla knew the wall her parents had built wouldn't be easy to break down. Dinner that night began with the same tension as always. Clara and Roberto kept their cold expressions, while Camilla, still hurt from the earlier argument, remained silent. Marcos, however, was calm and resolute. He had reached the point where he couldn't continue the charade any longer. In the middle of the meal, Marcos set his utensils down, cleared his throat, and looked directly at Clara and Roberto. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice firm but without arrogance. All eyes at the table turned toward him. Clara raised an eyebrow, and Roberto stopped cutting his steak. Camilla tensed, sensing that something big was coming. "I haven't been completely honest about who I am. The man you think I am, poor and unable to take care of Camilla, doesn't actually exist. My name is Marcos and I own several companies. I'm a millionaire." The room suddenly went silent. Clara and Roberto exchanged glances, unsure of what to say. The shock was visible on their faces. Clara tried to hide her discomfort, but her eyes betrayed her internal confusion. Roberto, who had been so confident in his judgments before, now seemed at a loss for words. "I disguised myself because I wanted to see how you would treat me without the weight of my fortune," Marcos continued. "I wanted to see who you really were, without masks, without appearances. I was testing your intentions." Camilla's eyes widened in disbelief. Clara and Roberto, on the other hand, were stunned, their faces frozen. What once seemed like a matter of status and power had now turned into a harsh lesson for them. Marcos, calm and composed, waited for the reaction that he knew would change the course of their relationship forever. Clara could barely look at Marcos. The shock of the revelation was still pulsing through her mind, but what consumed her now was shame. She had always prided herself on being a refined woman, someone who could judge a person's character, but here she was, exposed by her own prejudice. Roberto, sitting beside her, seemed lost in his own thoughts, his hand trembling slightly as he held his wine glass. He avoided eye contact with everyone at the table. I don't know what to say," Clara murmured, breaking the heavy silence. Her voice, usually firm and authoritative, was shaky, almost a whisper. "We made a huge mistake." Marcos didn't respond immediately, but there was a calmness in his posture that suggested he had expected this reaction. Camilla, on the other hand, felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief that her parents' judgment was being challenged, and sadness for realizing how they truly thought. "We thought we were protecting our daughter," Roberto finally said, though without much conviction. "But clearly we failed to see what's most important." Marcos watched them for a moment before responding, his tone free of bitterness but firm. "What's most important, Mr. Roberto, is character, not money. I wanted to see if you could recognize that, but unfortunately, appearance was all you saw." Camilla took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. Despite the tension in the air, there was a sense of justice. Marcos had revealed the truth, and in doing so, exposed Clara and Roberto to their own flaws. Later, sitting by a calm lake, Marcos gazed at the reflection of the stars in the water. The quiet night offered him the space he needed to reflect. His plan to disguise himself as a poor man had revealed far more than he expected, not just about Camilla's parents, but about himself too. He thought back to each moment of that week, Clara's uncomfortable stares, the harsh conversation with Roberto, the tension that hung over every dinner. Despite everything, what stood out most in his mind was Camilla's gaze. She never wavered. In the midst of her parents' coldness, his fiancée always looked at him with love, respect, and patience. Wealth was never what drew her to him, and that was now clearer than ever. Marcos smiled, relieved. The journey had been intense, but now he knew for certain that Camilla's love was real. Neither the tests he had set up nor her family's materialistic judgment had changed what she felt. He had also been tested. At first he thought he needed to make sure he wasn't seen only as a millionaire. In the end, he realized that the most important thing was the truth, and that truth had been clear all along. What they had went far beyond money, beyond any test, and that brought him peace. Sitting in the garden, Camilla and Marcos talked under the soft light of dawn. The weight of the previous night's revelations still lingered, but now, with everything out in the open, the path ahead seemed clearer. Camilla, with a steady gaze, held Marcos's hand. "I never cared about how much you had, Marcos. What matters to me is who you are," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. He smiled, finally feeling relief settle in his chest. The test had been for her parents, but deep down he feared it was also a test for Camilla. However, her words erased any doubts. As the two talked, Clara and Roberto appeared in the distance. Ashamed, their expressions reflected the regret that consumed them. Clara, always so proud, now seemed fragile. We were unfair," Roberto began, his voice hesitant. "We let ourselves be carried away by our own ambitions without realizing what truly matters." Clara nodded, her eyes filled with guilt. "We thought we were protecting our daughter, but instead we hurt everyone. We're sorry, Marcos. We don't know how to make this right." Marcos looked at Camilla, and both knew that reconciliation would be a process. But at that moment, the first seed of forgiveness had been planted. Camilla gave her parents a slight smile, as if ready to start over, with new values, free from any illusions of wealth. Marcos and Camilla, now closer than ever, walked side by side toward a new beginning. The weight of expectations, prejudices, and family pressures had been left behind. What remained between them was a genuine connection, built on trust, love, and honesty. And, "You know, I never imagined it would turn out this way," Camilla said softly, looking at the horizon. "But I'm glad we went through all of this. Now we can just be ourselves, without masks, without secrets." Marcos smiled, feeling the peace he had been searching for. The journey that started as a test had turned into something much greater, a reaffirmation of what truly mattered. "What matters is what we build from here on out," he replied, squeezing Camilla's hand. They both knew challenges would still come, but now they were ready to face them together, without letting others' judgments or the weight of wealth dictate their choices. Clara and Roberto's mansion felt distant, both physically and emotionally. It was time to follow their own path, to build a life that reflected who they truly were, far from the shadows of the past. With light hearts, they took their first step toward an unknown but promising future. A new journey awaited them, and this time it would be written by them alone. Did you like the story? Leave your comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so you don't miss any stories like this.